As most of you know, I am reading Lord of the Rings for the first time in my life. And as I'm reading, I'm writing a bunch of essays on my experience of the book. And as most of you know, I have an imperfect understanding of this book because I have not finished it. And I don't know some of the finer details of the characters and some of the plot and everything like that. But be that as it may, I still want to talk about some of these characters as I currently view them and how I think they're currently portrayed in my current read. Because one, I think it's interesting to show my baseline understanding just of some of these characters and how it may change over the course of my reading. And two, because I actually think it's really interesting to show how I am reading these characters at any given moment and how that might show how Tolkien might be leading these characters or leading the reader to believe what these characters are trying to, accomplish and do. And number three, I just really like doing it. And today I want to talk about one specific character, Eowyn. Specifically, the moment that she is asleep in the Houses of Healing chapter when Éomer, Aragorn, and Gandalf are having a conversation about her. I am operating under the assumption of not fully trusting even the most trustworthy characters to always be speaking the truth when they are talking or when they are speaking about a character, because there was one major thing that annoyed me with this whole conversation that they were kind of having about Éowyn. Well, there was a few things, but I just essentially just want to go through this entire conversation and discuss how I viewed it. But the fact that all three of them were discussing her as if it was kind of set in stone. And Eowyn is just laying there in some coma from the Black Shadow, not being able to respond. That's the one thing that really annoyed me. And I'm curious if she's hearing this all in her brain at all, and she's annoyed at what they're saying. And the conversation is really sweet, but I also want to talk about this whole thing because I want to lay out what my understanding of Eowyn is at the moment. And I guess where I agree and disagree with these character assessments so far for what Aragorn, Gandalf, and Éomer are saying. I don't disagree with Gandalf that much. I don't disagree with Éomer that much, but I do disagree with some of the things that Aragorn says. So in the book, the conversation moves kind of like this. But Aragorn came to Éowyn, and he said, "Here is a grievous hurt and a heavy blow. The arm that was broken has been tended with due skill, and it will mend in time, if she has the strength to live. It is a shield arm that is maimed. But the chief evil comes through the sword arm. In that, there now seems no life, although it is unbroken." So in this paragraph, Aragorn speaks true facts and true medical facts about Éowyn. I have to admit, I'd probably be a bit annoyed if I was in a coma and I overheard someone talking about if I had the will to live or not, because I think Aragorn gets her in some instance and just doesn't, and I'll keep talking about this for the duration of this essay. I think Aragorn thinks himself to be the main source of her wound. I will talk about this later because Aragorn does get it right, but his starting place is a bit frustrating for me because this is kindly to some extent. It just depends on what is going through Aragorn's mind, and I don't think we know that. If he thinks that she lacks the will because he scorned her and said that she could not come on the journey with him, then I think he's a little bit mad. If, and I actually believe this one to be true, if the actual way that Aragorn sees her is that he thinks that she lacks the will to live because of everything that has happened to her in her life, like seeing her uncle, die, who was really her father, and her lacking the ability to really live the life that she wants and feeling caged, and her riding to battle on day's end, and kind of being scorned by everyone at every single turn, and being wooed and preyed upon by Wormtongue for most of her life, I totally understand why she lacks the will to live and the desire for that. And so I think that's what Aragorn's really getting at with everything going on. She might lack the will to live. But the book goes on. "Alas, for she was pitted against a foe beyond the strength of her mind or body." Now, this is just true. "And those who will take weapon to such enemy must be sterner than steel," which is a good compliment here. "If the very shock shall not destroy them. It was an evil doom that set her in this path." And I like thinking that this line is essentially Aragorn saying that she was kind of just dealt a bad hand from birth, which is valid. Her, maybe more than any other character, has been dealt a rough hand. Perhaps the roughest that I know of, to be completely honest. But I will come back to this point. "For she is a fair maiden, fairest lady of the House of Queens. And yet I know not how I should speak of her." Okay, let's come out of this for a quick second because I don't get this line. Why is it important that he knows how he should speak of her? This is someone who needs healing, Aragorn. I think he should just heal her. And in this moment, speak of her as the young shield maiden of Rohan. I know they kind of had a slight history when she fell before Aragorn and she kind of begged that she come with him. But in this moment, this is the kind of moment where I kind of think Aragorn is being a bit too big for his britches. He kind of perceives himself too highly on this totem pole of Éowyn's love and affection and to be maybe the source of Éowyn's lack of desire to live. But at the same time, I actually think he's kind of right. So I have very confusing beliefs about Aragorn's discussion of Éowyn, and I'm kind of just looking to straighten some of these out. Because to him, he's kind of right. Éowyn did fall before him and profess her love and beg her to come with him. So to Aragorn, he's right to have his ego stroked a little bit. And it's also a bit strange because I sense a little bit like too much of a look at me attitude in Aragorn in the chapter, when in every other occurrence, he's kind of anything but that. So it's a really interesting chapter. He is the picture of humility in this chapter, except with this conversation with Éowyn, but I'll revisit this. And I actually want to know too, maybe I'm reading certain things wrong, but there's a conversation that happens at the very end of this chunk of text that really seems to kind of rub me the wrong way with how Aragorn perceived Éowyn. But the text goes on. When I first looked on her and perceived her unhappiness, it seemed to me that I saw a white flower standing straight and proud, shapely as a lily, and yet knew that it was hard, as if wrought by elf rites out of steel. So she's beautiful, but she's jilted. Or was it maybe a frost that had turned its sap to ice, and so it stood bittersweet, still fair to see, but stricken, soon to fall and die? Her malady begins far back before this day, does it not, Éomer? Now, this is fantastic of Aragorn, and I think this answers kind of my initial question that I had above. But Aragorn speaks of her rightly here, going into what exactly caused her to be like how he described above. Also, Aragorn did have some feelings for her. He at the very least enjoyed her beauty. But because he's sworn to Arwen and seems to truly love Arwen, he's not really putting that option on the table. But the text goes on. I marvel that you should ask me, Lord, he answered, for I hold you blameless in this matter, as in all else. Yet I knew not that Éowyn, my sister, was touched by any frost until she first looked on you. Care and dread she had, and shared with me in the days of Wormtongue and the king's bewitchment. And she tended the king in growing fear. But that did not bring her to this pass. Now this is my favorite, and I think this is the saddest moment in this entire text exchange right here. Because Aragorn, he brings the history to Éomer and asks him to fill the rest of the history in, and he's sitting there going, I don't know. I didn't recognize the things that she was going through, which is so true to real life. Most of the times we don't really recognize the terrors that are happening to the people that we love sometimes, and the people who have lived right beside us for our entire life. I know people in families who have been abused, and one sibling might tell their story, and the other sibling just goes, I never realized that, because they're shattered, and they say, I never knew about any of it. It's absolutely tragic. And the guilt that Éomer must be feeling here is really brutal. And Éomer had some issues of his own that he had to deal with, but still tragic that he never saw this until she was right in front of Aragorn. It shows a few things potentially. Number one, how well Éowyn kept quiet about this. How well she may have been groomed to keep quiet about this, which is even more tragic. Or even potentially how blind Éomer was about this. I don't really view the last one as to be that true, but I do think it's sad to think about that. Sometimes in family relationships, we kind of need things blatantly stated and shown to really see it. Even sometimes when it's blatantly stated, we still don't see it. And I've often seen that. But the text goes on with what Gandalf says, which is fantastic and a bit strange too, because there was a line that was given to Wormtongue in the movies that was really said by Gandalf, and Philippa Boyens actually said that she knows the change would have made Professor Tolkien mad, but she knew it had to be said by someone, so she just included that, and it helped make the character of Grima that much more insidious and kind of like all-knowing, which is a valid point. But this is the line. Well, that line comes later, but this is the beginning of Gandalf's chunk. My friend, said Gandalf, you had horses and deeds of arms, and the free fields, But she, born in the body of a maid, had a spirit and courage least the match of yours. Yet she was doomed to wait upon an old man whom she loved as a father, and watch him falling into a mean, dishonored dotage. And her part seemed to her more ignoble than that of the staff that he leaned on. This kind of gets at the heart of Éowyn to at least some extent, I believe. She has had a brutal past that she didn't really feel befitted her. She's kind of like a Disney princess who just wants to experience the world outside, but she just can't get to it because this isn't a child's story. This isn't a child's tale. And so she is just forced to kind of do her duty and be preyed upon by Grima Wormtongue as no one sees this and everyone turns a blind eye to it. But Gandalf goes on. Think you that Wormtongue had poison only for Theoden's ears? Dotard. What is the house of Errol but a thatched barn where brigands drink in the reek and their brats roll on the floor among their dogs? Have you not heard those words before? Saruman spoke them, the teacher of Wormtongue, though I do not doubt that Wormtongue at home wrapped their meanings in terms more cunning. My lord, if your sister's love for you and her will still bent to her duty had not restrained her lips, you might have heard even such things as these escape them. But who knows what she spoke to the darkness, alone, in the bitter watches of the night, when all her life seemed shrinking, and the walls of her bower closing in about her. A hutch to trammel some wild thing in. Now this line is the most interesting to me, to be completely honest. And it changes the meaning a bit from if it comes from Gandalf's mouth rather than Grima's. But at the same time, the perceptiveness of these characters, it doesn't necessarily matter so much for that fact. Gandalf saying this is almost worse because it seems truer than if Wormtongue were saying this, which when Wormtongue says it, it's like Éowyn stands up and says, your words are poison, snake. So in the movies, this actually has like a rebellious flavor to it. While, I don't know, in the books it kind of feels like rebellion, but it's almost broken out of her. I don't know. And I kind of think the manipulation and the craft of Wormtongue is even more insidious in the books than the movies, because Gandalf just seems to be implying that she might have said these horrific things in the dead of night because Wormtongue poisoned her mind. At the very least, I think that this is kind of what the line is saying. Let me know if you also think this is what it's saying. Sometimes this line confuses me a little bit. But Wormtongue may have softened or disguised the insults coming from Saruman and Éowyn, and at Éowyn, so he wouldn't say them so crudely, but the meaning and the core of it was really the same. To make Rohan and then Éowyn herself feel small and isolated in a hopeless place, which is like a stalker and something that an abuser would do. And I think that line, I think the thing that I love most about that and about what Gandalf says here is that if Éowyn's love for Éomer wasn't present, then Éomer would have heard these things. But Éowyn loves Éomer so much, she shut her mouth. And therefore, Éomer had a tough time seeing the abuse because Éowyn suffered silently because of it. It's tragic, but it's also unbelievably heroic and brave that Éowyn thought this. Now, I think she was wrong, but I do think Gandalf just nails this about her, though. I love this characterization that he has. It's this conundrum that I've kind of experienced before of not wanting people that you love to be affected by the abusers and the people who are kind of like harming you. So you kind of isolate yourself and shut yourself off to the people that you love. So you think the abuser's abuse ends with you and doesn't really transfer over. It's a weird frame of mind that I don't necessarily think always works. And it's tragic that sometimes we think that we have to feel isolated in those senses. But maybe it does sometimes work. I don't know. I'm not like a psychologist, so I don't really have the answers for that one. But poor Éowyn here, above everything else. I feel like I just understand her pain. Her loyalty restrained her anger. And so Gandalf imagines Éowyn alone at night feeling trapped, her life narrowing, her duties kind of suffocating her. And her room is just one place of, like, her room has become a hutch, a cage for this wild thing. And that image is really, really heartbreaking to me, that Éowyn, as this proud creature, as this proud being, is locked in confinement. Her courage and her vitality are kind of turned inward by the despair. And the darkness that she spoke isn't really like this literal night, but it's this despair and this corruption that Wormtongue and Saruman spread to her. Gandalf kind of implies that she's been spiritually imprisoned by this. And she's kind of feeling humiliated almost. And again, I think that Gandalf truly understands Eowyn in this moment. I think it's really well spoken of her. But I think this is kind of why I get annoyed with Aragorn in this moment too. Because he just seems to think, at least to some extent, that this was or is about him. And the love that she professed to him. When that profession was simply just her way to escape the prison that she was in. Was there some attraction there? Probably. Aragorn is kind of a stud, so I get it. Eowyn is kind of a beautiful maid, so I get it. But that was kind of her motive for professing her love. I don't really think that it was their mutual attraction. I think it was because she was utterly trapped and had felt no way of escape. And this man might feel like the light in the tunnel that she needed to get to escape the tunnel. But maybe I'm kind of reading too much into what Aragorn said prior about her. I don't really know. I'm confused about some of this. And I do think this conversation, at the end of the day, really is more for Éomer and not Eowyn, and not even for the reader. Aragorn and Gandalf are having this conversation about Éowyn, not to mansplain the situation to the reader, but they are doing this so that Éomer understands what his sister went through, and for him to be able to rightly, kind of, with him being absent-minded of her sufferings, deal with her when she wakes up. And this makes the nobility of Aragorn in this section even more noble. And even though I still kind of think that Aragorn might think too highly of himself in that Éowyn had a crush on him, I will talk about this in a minute in the next paragraph. I actually think that Aragorn leaving the room after he heals her the majority of the way and before she wakes up shows his dedication to healing her the right and proper way. And for this conversation to be kind of focused around Éomer, it's almost an intervention with Éomer just to let him see that he did not see what Éowyn was going through. So it's like Aragorn is doing great things here, and I love the things that he's doing that are really, really kind and really good for Éomer's sake. And then there are just things that are strange to me. But the text goes on. Then Éomer was silent and looked on his sister, as if pondering anew all the days of their past life together. But Aragorn said, I saw also what you saw, Éomer. Now, if Aragorn stopped at this sentence, I'd be happy, because Éomer is looking back on his life, and he's regretting not seeing his sister's struggles. It's a moment of realization and guilt. He's sensing that she is despairing, and her longing for death and for glory was kind of born from her years of loneliness and from her years of neglect. And Aragorn says, I understand what you're going through. But he is going to speak so foolishly, to my opinion, in the next paragraph, because he's comparing the grief that Éomer is experiencing, which is the grief of not seeing your sister's abuse for his entire life, with Aragorn just keeping her in that abuse a little bit longer. Maybe I'm not understanding this line, so help me out here. I just kind of think that it's annoying for what Aragorn says. This is the sentence. Few other griefs amid the ill chances of this world have more bitterness and shame for a man's heart than to behold the love of a lady so fair and brave that cannot be returned. No, Aragorn, you should get over this in a day. The greater grief of the two is the brother who was blind to his sister's sufferings for his whole life. This is something Éomer will carry with him for the rest of his life. Aragorn probably won't carry this with him. The text goes on. Sorrow and pity have followed me ever since I left her desperate in Dunharrow, and rode to the paths of the dead. And no fear upon that way was so present as the fear for what might befall her. Now, this is valid. I think Aragorn was struggling because he kind of felt sad that he had to leave her behind, to all this horror that she had to endure and experience for pretty much her whole life. But then Aragorn says something a bit out of pocket. And maybe kind of had my head scratching a little bit, thinking, does anyone actually doubt this? Because the text says this, and yet, Éomer, I say to you that she loves you more truly than me. For you she loves and knows, but in me she loves only a shadow and a thought, a hope of glory and great deeds, and lands far from the fields of Rohan. Now, that's a good classification of her at the end. She loved the shadow in Aragorn and not really the real person. But I don't think that it was really love. So why does Aragorn have such a hard time thinking that he had to not return her love? Because that would never be hard for me. If someone loved the perception of who I was, and for what I could give them and not for who I am, that's an easy goodbye. Because that's the surefire way to actually let someone down. I had to do this. This is a wild story. I had to do this a few years ago when I was kind of in a relationship with someone. This was like almost a decade ago. And someone dumped me after 2 months because they thought I was too sad and depressed. And they didn't want my sadness and depression rubbing off on them and making them less happy, which I guess is valid for them. Good for them, to each their own. But this person wasn't really in a relationship with me for who I was because of the person that I was. They were with me, to be completely honest, because they really liked my sister-in-law and they wanted to be sisters with my sister-in-law. So there were some other issues there, but that was an easy one for me where I was like, yeah, I don't feel bad about how things ended. If you kind of think that, just go on, live your life, whatever. But it was a strange little relationship. So maybe Aragorn actually, likes Éowyn and is bummed that her reciprocation is different and based on his status and what he can give her. Maybe. Again, I don't know. This essay is just one big I don't know if I'm reading wrongly and I just need help. I think Aragorn classified her correctly at the end of the sentence, but it doesn't match up with the beginning of what he's saying, which I guess is why I'm confused. And above all, I think they never really admit this to each other, which is really interesting. But I do want to know what Éowyn would say here were she awake. It's just annoying that in this moment we don't really have her perspective. Is she sitting there in her sleep just having a dream about this as the conversation kind of comes to her ears and she's thinking, they have this all wrong? I don't know. Apparently there's a moment where Éowyn gives her opinion or gives her thoughts later on in the book that people kind of have told me about. So we'll see when we get there. But I just have this smidge of confusion about Aragorn here. And that kind of transfers over to Éowyn. And so I think it's really interesting. Like, Aragorn has great moments in this. He has like less great moments. But the idea that he thinks that her suffering is kind of because of him. And that he is, again, there's that moment. So when he's comparing and when he's talking to Éomer in that section. And he says like, I understand what you're going through. Few griefs have the same feeling as this. And he lays it out. I like that he's giving empathy and he's like empathizing with Éomer there. He's saying, Éomer, whatever you're going through, I understand it. At the same point, he doesn't understand it because their griefs are totally separate and distinct. I'm not a big person who likes to compare griefs. But if we're comparing griefs, Éomer's grief should be significantly more than Aragorn's. And Aragorn has no real right to compare the grief that he's experiencing to the grief that Éomer is experiencing. Because Éomer has essentially turned a blind eye to this for his entire life. And he's probably dealing with immense guilt. And Aragorn feels guilt in a little bit of a moment, but it's just not on the same playing field at all. And Aragorn's saying, I understand what you're going through because I left her sitting there and I couldn't, I couldn't bring, what's the word? He says, I couldn't, love her back or whatever the word was. I kind of forgot that. But it's just not on the same playing field as what Éomer is experiencing here. So again, I think this chapter is really interesting because it has really good moments of Aragorn and then really weird and strange moments of Aragorn where he's like talking and I don't think he's exactly on the same page or maybe saying the right things here. But what I want to do is I do want to end this on a really good section of Aragorn because the rest of this chapter paints a great picture of Aragorn. So we're just going to end this positively of Aragorn and I think positively of Éowyn because her section in the end of this is brilliant too for like how everything happens. So this is what the text says. I have maybe the power to heal her body and to recall her from the dark valley. But to what she will awake, hope or forgetfulness or despair, I do not know. And if to despair, then she will die, unless other healing comes which I cannot bring. Alas, for her deeds have set her among the queens of great renown. Then Aragorn stooped and looked in her face, and it was indeed white as a lily, cold as frost and hard as graven stone. But he bent and kissed her on the brow, and called her softly, saying, Éowyn, Éowyn's daughter, awake, for your enemy has passed away. She did not stir, but now she began again to breathe deeply, so that her breast rose and fell beneath the white linen of the sheet. Once more Aragorn bruised 2 leaves of athelas and cast them into steaming water. and he laved her brow with it, and her right arm lying cold and nerveless on the coverlet. Then, whether Aragorn had indeed some forgotten power of westerness, or whether it was but his word of the Lady Eowyn that wrought on them as the sweet influence of the herbs stole about the chamber, it seemed to those who stood by that a keen wind blew through the window, and it bore no scent, but was an air, wholly fresh and clean and young, as if it had not before been breathed by any living thing, and came new made from snowy mountains, high beneath a dome of stars, or from shores of silver, far away, washed by seas of foam. "Awake, Eowyn, Lady of Rohan," said Aragorn again, and he took her right hand in his, and felt it warm with life returning. "Awake, the shadow is gone, and all darkness is washed clean." Then he laid her hand in Éomer's, and stepped away. "Call her," he said, and he passed silently from the chamber. "Eowyn, Eowyn," cried Éomer amid his tears. But she opened her eyes and said, "Éomer, what joy is this? For they said that you were slain." "Nay, but that was only the dark voices in my dream. How long have I been dreaming?" "Not long, my sister," said Éomer, "but think no more on it." "I am strangely weary," she said. "I must rest a little, but tell me, what of the Lord of the Mark? Alas, do not tell me that it was a dream, for I know that it was not. He is dead, as he foresaw." "He is dead," said Éomer. "But he bade me say farewell to Éowyn, dearer than daughter. He lies now in great honor in the citadel of Gondor." "That is grievous," she said, "and yet it is good, beyond all that I dared hope in the dark days, when it seemed that the house of Eorl was sunk in honor less than any shepherd's cot. And what of the king's esquire, the halfling? Éomer, you shall make him a knight of the Riddermark, for he is valiant. He lies nearby in this house, and I will go to him," said Gandalf. "Éomer shall stay here for a while, but do not speak yet of war or woe until you are made whole again. Great gladness it is to see you wake again to health and hope, so valiant a lady." "To health," said Éowyn. "It may be so, at least while there is an empty saddle of some fallen rider that I can fill, and there are deeds to do. But to hope, I do not know." What a great moment for everyone here. Aragorn, Éomer, Éowyn, Gandalf, and all this to say that Tolkien has just written some really complex characters. It's really fun for me trying to figure some of them out. And I just want to make this so you can kind of watch me stumble through figuring out these characters. So be kind in the comments if you want to kind of correct me on some of this idea, but let me know where you think I might be right or where you think I might be wrong. Make sure you also subscribe. You can like the video as well, or become a member for some members only content and some early access to videos. And as always, remember to look toward Numenor that was, and beyond to Elvenhome that is, and to that which is beyond Elvenhome and will ever be. I'll see you in the next one.